Welcome to Sri Lanka at 99.94, the home of cricket audio. I'm Mark Machado from the Murali end, and my co-host is Estelle Devon from the Papare. We are your home for Sri Lankan content, and we'll be right here several times every week discussing everything going on in Sri Lankan cricket. You can find us in your favourite podcast places on YouTube or in the 99.94 app. Thanks for joining Cricket's conversation. Today we're talking about how Sri Lanka have developed in the last 12 months, the Silverwood effect, and two young seamers, Asitha Fernando and Dilshad Madhushankar. Estelle, at the time of recording this, I should say that Sri Lanka have just, in the last kind of 36 hours, beaten India. And, they were kind of 3/4 of the way to get into the Asia Cup final. That was confirmed last night when Pakistan beat Afghanistan. So they've now got 2 games left in the Asia Cup. They'll be playing Pakistan on Friday and then again in the final on Sunday. I just can't believe the transformation we've seen in this Sri Lanka side in the last, I was going to say 12 months, but actually it's been slightly longer than that, hasn't it? It's been about 15 months or so. For many observers, I think we've kind of, the common consensus is that the low point was Sri Lanka's tour to England last May and the Durham incident. How do you feel about this transformation that we've seen?
Yeah, you're right. I think that was really the low point in Durham. And we did see some of these youngsters who are now performing feature for the first time in that series. Someone like Mahesh Deekshana, I think, Charit Asalanka. And to see how far they have come within that 1 year is just incredible. Like you mentioned, it's kind of almost unbelievable to see how well they've done in the Asia Cup so far. Obviously, they had the belief. The turnaround, like you mentioned, has been coming along. I think Mickey Arthur played a massive part in it, the change of captaincy, selection committees, where I feel like the intent was to go with a more aggressive approach that is appropriate to T20 cricket or limited overs cricket in the modern age, where Sri Lanka was, I think, lagging a bit behind in the previous years. So it's been a massive turnaround. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of things to come.
Yeah, I remember at this time last year, we were getting ready for a T20 series against South Africa, which was going to be our last series before going over to the UAE for the World Cup. And at the time, Sri Lanka were, in T20s at least, were going at, you just thought any score over 120, if they were batting first, was good. And that the only way that they'd be able to win games is if they were able to restrict the opposition to a low score, and they can kind of chase it down quite easily. But what I'm most impressed with at this moment is we're not just reliant on somebody high up the order getting a big score, but I think we're able to rebuild when things go wrong. So we saw against India an incredible opening partnership, and then when the wickets fell, and they fell in quite quick succession, Pathum and Kusal got out, and my gut reaction was, oh no, is that it? Is there collapse on? But actually, they were able to rebuild, and they were able to maintain a good run rate, right? And they didn't get, Charith Asalanka got out for a duck, I think, and they didn't panic, and they were still able to go on and get the score, which we just weren't seeing a year ago, right?
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what's helped them succeed so far, the batting, because Sri Lanka has really kind of relied on the bowling attack in the previous couple of years. The likes of Wanindu Hasaranga, Mahesh Deekshana are really coming good in that period, Chamira as well, Dushmantha Chamira. But this time, what was really impressive for me to see as well was the fact that as a fan, even when 4 wickets were down, you're thinking, no, if they get it down to 50 or 5 or 30 of the last 3, Shanaka, Hasaranga, Chamika Karunaratne, Bhanuka Rajapaksa, they're going to get Sri Lanka home, which is not a familiar feeling as a Sri Lankan cricket fan, because like you mentioned, the Perahara, we would call it, is what we've seen in the last couple of years, 1 wicket and then, a few going in quick succession. But this time things have really changed. I think it's also the intent, like you mentioned, they managed to keep the scoring up. So they haven't been put under extra pressure by eating up deliveries and getting bogged down on one end, which is, I think, even if you look at Asalanka's dismissal in the game against India, you'd rather have him go for a two-ball duck than eat up 2 overs in that situation when you're chasing 170. So in that sense, it was very unselfish of him. He's basically thinking, I hit out or I get out. And that worked in Sri Lanka's favor, because at that point, if they had got bogged down and given away like 2 cheap overs, the pressure would have really been on Bhanuka Rajapaksha and Dasun Shanaka when they came into bat.
So let's talk about how these changes happen, right? That they are this time last year, as I mentioned, they were playing South Africa in a T20 series. It didn't go great. Then we got the announcement, I think probably at the beginning of October, end of September, that Mahela Jayawardene was going to have a consultancy role with the team for I think at the time they said was it 18 months? I can't remember how long exactly. And I remember that moment across social media for Sri Lanka fans was just one of those like, oh, he's coming back. Like, he's arguably, Sri Lanka's greatest ever coach, right? If you forget all his batting exploits, he's definitely the greatest ever T20 coach we've ever produced. And I think it kind of instantly galvanized or it changed, not galvanized, it changed the conversation around the team. Suddenly, it just felt like there was a little bit of hope, even though this man wasn't even going to take to the pitch. And then we saw them go to the World Cup, and we saw them start to put performances in. I personally, I think the qualifiers really helped that. So they had to go and play, some of the teams that don't have test status, your Namibias, your Papua New Guineas, and some of the smaller sides to qualify for it. But I think it helped the team build confidence. They went to the World Cup, they did really well, and then soon afterwards, we got news that they were going to let Mickey Arthur go. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm not sure if that's a good decision or not, because he seems to have, in a short space of time, actually kind of got a group of players and developed them quite a lot. But now it looks like actually that decision was totally justified, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had this discussion on the Murali pod as well about Mickey Arthur. Even I was not really convinced that it was the right time to let him go. I think the feeling from the management was that tactically he's not the right coach for limited overs cricket. But I think the feeling around fans and people who were watching Sri Lanka cricket was that what he's done in the period that he was in charge is that he's developed some real talent. He's taken the kind of the guys who we see who show some promise and kind of develop them into players who can star in international cricket. So during his tenure, we've seen pretty much everyone who's starring now was on his radar at that point. Even someone like Dilshan Madhushankar, just 21 years of age. But I remember very clearly Mickey in his last press conference mentioning that this guy, he's got some real skills, he's got some promise. So I think at that point it did seem like, maybe it's a little bit too early, but I think bringing in Silverwood, what we're seeing now is that a little bit of that tactical side of things coming in. If you look at the way Sri Lanka have chased in the Asia Cup so far, that intent is not something that we have seen before. I think it's also kind of a mental thing. Dasun Shanaka's a superhuman effort against Australia a couple of months ago kind of, I think, gave them a bit of belief that it's achievable. They do have the batters who can get those 10 to 12 runs and over at the death. So it's a little bit of everything. I think now looking back, it seems like a really good choice to have moved on from that development stage and try to build towards being a more competitive side come the World Cup in Australia.
Yeah, I also think because they've played so much more cricket in the last 12 months that teams are a bit more fearful of them. I think, I remember very clearly, almost exactly this time last year at my rugby club, having a conversation with somebody who was a big cricket fan, basically saying there isn't anyone in the Sri Lanka team that they fear. And I was like, well, I think you're sleeping on Hasaranga. I think he's an absolute handful for anyone. Obviously, at the time, I think I can't remember exactly when the IPL restarted, but he was involved in that. And a year later, Hasaranga is one of the best bowlers in the world now. Right, his reputation is huge. I think we saw this against India, that I felt that batsmen are just trying to see him off now, and even if it's pretty rare this happened against India that he doesn't get wickets. But I still think it'll be kind of 4 overs where batsmen won't be trying to mess about. And I know later on in the show we're going to talk about the 2 young seamers as well, and they've developed a bit of strength and depth. But I just think the experience, we've talked about a Sri Lanka team being in transition, and maybe, just maybe, the transition is coming to an end. Let's talk about Silverwood. But before that, let me just remind you that 99.94 is more than just the podcast. Jared Kimber has Red Inca and Double Century, one show that talks about modern global game and the other that is a deep dive into our sports history. A Double Century will now appear weekly, but there's also our expanding network on teams. There's pods on England, South Africa, India, the West Indies, and also minor league cricket as well. So if you're an American cricket fan, you can get stuck into that. If you want to find them, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM, download our app, or Google 99.94 podcasts. Estelle, we talked about Chris Silverwood. I think it's worth having a deeper look into him, because when he took over, I don't think there was a huge amount of fanfare around it. And also, as now seems kind of quite normal, a lot of the names that were initially linked to the position kind of fizzled out, right? I remember that Paul Farbrace was linked with a comeback, and that didn't happen. What was the reaction like in Sri Lanka when Chris Silverwood was appointed? Were people ecstatic that he was taken over, or was it as muted as I think it was?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of disappointment, because it was almost like a hit to Sri Lanka's pride. The guy who's sacked as England coach is now going to coach Sri Lanka. But I think what people also maybe didn't understand was the fact that he was let go of by the ECB because of the form England had shown in their Test cricket, whereas he had been involved in England's most successful period in limited overs cricket from, I believe, 2018 to end of 2021. So that's when they've been winning the World Cups. They've been one of the top teams in T20 and ODI cricket. So I feel like that part it didn't really hit the Sri Lankan fans at that point. But there was, I would say, a little bit of disappointment that it wasn't a more high profile kind of appointment.
Yeah, so from if you're an English cricket, or if you're a cricket fan in England, what you would have seen was England come off a terrible Ashes series, and then almost in some ways an even more terrible West Indies series, and Chris Silverwood loses the job soon after that, and he's kind of the last 9 months or so of his tenure were actually quite painful to watch in many ways, because there was people, and I'll put my hands up here, including myself, who was just saying, I don't think he's up for the job. He seems like a really good bloke, but the Test side at least looked utterly clueless at points. And when he was appointed the Sri Lanka coach, I was one of those who was just like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. But I actually sat down and thought about it for a little bit. I poured myself a strong coffee and stared out the window. And I was like, actually, the Sri Lankan cricket team operates very differently to the England team. It operates more like a club, right? Where they're in touch. They meet up quite frequently, even, when they're not playing, but I think they play a lot more cricket than England do. So they're together a lot more. And also I was like, it's quite an exciting time to be involved in Sri Lankan cricket, in terms of there's a lot of young, good players, talented players coming through. But more than anything, the thing that I was like, let me see if the one quality he had was that he was a good white ball coach. When he was with England, he had Owen Morgan as white ball captain, and a lot of the success possibly unfairly was attributed to Owen Morgan, and people said Owen Morgan's a maverick captain. He's a maverick player. Owen Morgan barely scored any runs for the last, since they won the World Cup in 2019. But there was still, every time you had the conversation, there was still a clamour to keep him at the side. And people saying it's just because of his leadership abilities. But actually, maybe we need to reassess this. And actually, maybe, Chris Silverwood is some sort of white ball tactical genius, because we know he had success before he was with England, with the Essex team as well, which he's the coach in various white ball competitions. He went, he's the first English coach to win the ODI World Cup, which is a major achievement for a small cricketing nation like England, and obviously, something Sri Lanka would have done in the mid-90s, because that's the way we roll, and now I think we're really seeing the benefits and how good of a coach he is with Sri Lanka, right? Because he's not actually been in the position that long. And I obviously don't know what these codes mean, but when you see them playing, they're sticking up codes that to me look like items on a takeaway menu, B3 or A2 or C4 or whatever. But whatever it is, he's definitely turned the fortunes around. And I think the one major thing he's doing is, at the World Cup last year, we were getting ourselves into kind of match winning positions. We were staying in games and then not able to finish it off. We were losing games in the last 2 to 3 overs. And that, I don't want to say he's turned it around. I don't want to say we're never going to lose games in those positions again, because it's cricket and we will. But we look more in control at key moments, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's to do also with the intent. I think what he's kind of brought in is that, I don't want to say fearless, because that was kind of the mantra when Sri Lanka visited England last year, the series that went as badly as it could have. But if you look at the chasers Sri Lanka have put together in this Asia Cup, it's that intent to score. Even someone like Pathum Nissanka was making runs before. He's, I think, made the most number of runs for Sri Lanka over the last 2 years in T20 cricket. But he was always the kind of player who would, settle down, then go for his big shots. But what we've seen here is, in that power play, beyond the first 2 overs, either Kusal Mendes or Pathum Nissanka, both very similar players, have tried to, get that one boundary and over, because they know that those 6 overs are critical to what comes next. Similarly, when wickets have gone, we've seen the likes of Bhanuka Rajapaksha, Dasun Shanaka coming in and playing their shots. They're not looking to survive 20 overs. They're looking to get the runs on the board, which is, ideally how you should be playing T20 cricket, because there's no point holding on and then being dismissed for lower scores. So I think that intent is a massive thing that we've seen in the last couple of months, even against Australia. I don't think the pitchers in Sri Lanka really help that kind of play, because they do tend to help the bowlers a little bit more. So tactically, that side of things has really come together in this tournament. Be nice to see what they would do if we were forced to bat first, which ended chaotically in the first game of the tournament against Afghanistan. So we know, obviously, Dubai, there's a massive advantage when you do get to field first. So I'd be interested to see whether that intent and those tactics kind of change. But yeah, that area of things has really come a long way.
Yeah, it's I'm impressed with how quickly it's come along, and I wonder if, we're having this conversation about how far we've come along, and I know both me and you said before the tournament that really Sri Lanka should be looking to get to the final, which they've now achieved. I wonder if it sets the bar too high for the World Cup, right? Because there's just so many more better sides, and also this team hasn't got a huge amount of experience playing in Australia, and I suspect, we're going to talk about the bowlers in a moment. I suspect a few of the bowlers have never actually bowled in Australian conditions, so they're going to have to learn quickly, and they're going to have to learn on the job when it comes to that World Cup, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to be another massive challenge, particularly because Sri Lanka has depended on the likes of Wanindu Hasaranga and Mahish Theekshana as the spinner. So, I mean, if you look at, you look at the team on paper, you're going to be eyeing those two as the guys who are going to get you the breakthroughs. So in Australia, things are going to be a little different. They did play there earlier this year, got a win under their belts, chasing there, I think, once again. So there might be a little bit of confidence in, particularly, I think, someone like Teekshana, who doesn't rely on spin so much, but can kind of seam the ball and swing the ball a little bit. But the batters are going to really have to come out with the form they've kind of shown in this tournament. That's going to be the key for Sri Lanka. So I think, again, like you mentioned, those qualifiers are going to be really important. Getting that game time under their belts before they progress to kind of the business end of the World Cup, where they can kind of get their combinations right. I don't think there'll be too many changes from what we've seen in the Asia Cup, but get those tactics right, who's playing where, how they're going to go about things. But definitely, I think expectations are going to be really high now going into Australia.
Let's talk about the bowling unit, but before that, let me remind you that if you love cricket and want to hear more, well, head over to the 99.94 app. You can hear all our podcasts and our commentary. We're the home of cricket audio online, and we're adding new shows and covering series all the time. The best way to follow us is via our app or on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation. Estelle, two breakout stars for Sri Lanka, I think, in this Asia Cup series, Asitha Fernando and Dilshan Madhushankar. What can you tell us about those two players? Because they've been superb and both had to debut at this tournament.
Yeah, Madhushankar has been, I think, the find of the tournament for Sri Lanka. Might even, get his ticket to Australia based on this performance. He's quick, and what I really love about him is that he's aggressive. He's not bowling a short one and then, just putting his head down and turning back. He's in your face a little bit. He's got that bit of fire like Lahiru Kumara. So that's exciting to see from a young guy, just 21 or 22 years of age. The way he's bowled, particularly even in the last game in the death, when he's come up against some, guys with big reputations, right? Rishabh Pant, Hardik Pandya, even Deepak Huda. But the way he's held himself and really executed what he wanted to without panicking, I think is really impressive. Also, obviously, as a left armer, he brings in that unique angle, different to what we see in most teams. Quite different from Binura Fernando as a left armer as well. Binura is a lot taller and gets a lot more bounce, which, I mean, some would argue would be the better choice in Australia. But so far, what he's done is, I think the smarts behind what he's been doing is what's impressive. Like, he isn't bowling as fast as someone like Naseem Shah or Mohammad Hasnain, but the way he's kind of set up batsmen, the way he's got even the likes of guys like Rohit Sharma to struggle a little bit early on in the innings, swings the ball at pace, all that's really good. I mean, I could talk all day about Madhushankar because he's been so impressive. I didn't expect him to kind of make a start early on, but I thought we'd see, him at some point of the tournament, but he's been excellent. Asitha Fernando, actually, I think before Sri Lanka had their premier T20 tournament just before the Asia Cup, and he was a top wicket taker. I think before that, a lot of people kind of pegged him as a a red ball cricketer. He'd been kind of impressive in Bangladesh, got Sri Lanka over the line there, bowled well against Australia and Pakistan as well. So no one really, thought of him much of as a white ball bowler. But during that tournament, he finished as the highest wicket taker. And I think he has gone for runs in the past two games. In fact, against India, didn't bowl his quota of overs. Shanaka had to come in and bowl the last two. But what I like is that he adds an option for Sri Lanka in the death, particularly when they're without Dushman the Chamira. He has a good Yorker. I think he's a lot quicker than people kind of expect when they see him running up, bit nippy, gets the ball to skid on, which I think worked against him on Dubai tracks as well on some occasions, but definitely some real kind of depth coming into that bowling attack for Sri Lanka.
Yeah, what I really like about Asita Fernando is, for me, he just comes across as a bit of a fighter, right? He's got that kind of fighting spirit in him that you see in players like Hasaranga, even in Charmaka Karunaratne, or even in like people like, I know he's out of the team at the moment, but DDS and Dasan Janaka. And I think that's the kind of cricketers that get people out of their seats, right? Fernando it was brought him in the team as a bowler, yet he gets the runs to get us over the line against Bangladesh, right? So that's the stuff that fans like and keeps me going. And all I can say about Madhushankar is, don't do a Virat Kohli and don't sleep on this guy. If you're into cricket, this kid's got a potential to be a global superstar in a few years. I mean, coming out to the Asia Cup and what is effective, playing a big game against India to effectively, it's kind of like a semi-final, right? Because if you win it, you're halfway, or at least 3/3 of the way, to get into to the final, and to get Virat Kohli's wicket. And all right, Virat isn't been in the best of form recently, but he's still got a huge reputation. To get his wicket the way that he got his wicket was unbelievable. That sound, I mean, I actually might make that sound my my ringtone, right? It's that good, and it's just great to see young Sri Lankan players burst out from the domestic game and very quickly be able to make an impact internationally, because let's not pretend that SLC have put in some great domestic structure in place, because they haven't. They throw together these domestic T20 tournaments at what seems quite short notice. But what has happened, I think, is that it's creating a they only had 4 teams in it. And that if you don't know, I think they were called red, blue, green, and grey. So very creative names of the teams. But I think it is creating players that now are at least capable of doing something on the international stage. If you can shine in that tournament, then you can step up a level, which I think is great, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the first time we'd seen Dilshan Madhushankar really, get into action. He obviously made a name for himself at the under 19 World Cup a couple of years ago, where a lot of guys were, having their eyes on him. But this tournament just before the Asia Cup was what really got everyone excited, because of the way he was able to swing the ball at pace. I think there was a video circulating of him getting a wicket and Dhananjay De Silva kind of, giving an impressed look, which goes to show really that, even they must not have really had too much expectations from someone like him, but he was able to step up. And like you said, Virat Kohli is Virat Kohli, right? Whether he's in form or whether he's out of form or whatever, it doesn't matter. Virat Kohli is one of the greatest limited overs batters we've seen. So to get his wicket in a game like that, and even the way he bowled to Rahul and Rohit Sharma, it's just really impressive. That mental side of things really impressive, because that game could have made him, or like could have destroyed his kind of career, because if he had gone for runs early in that innings, it would have really pushed Sri Lanka into a tight corner, with Asita also going for runs. Also would have really dropped him mentally, right? So I mean, yeah, that was great from him. I'm just fingers crossed, we get to see more and more of him in the coming months. And don't forget, we've got another World Cup lined up next year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It does mean though that I think for the first time in kind of I say the history of T20 cricket, it's only been around for like 15 years, right? That there is actually quite a lot of depth in Sri Lanka's seam bowling, right? Because there's 3 players like Chamira, Lauru, and Benura Fernando, who you think they are definitely involved in that conversation. I mean, there's absolutely there's almost no country in the world that isn't taking Chamira to any kind of major white ball tournament if he's fit. Those three are all out injured at the moment. You've had two boys step in this tournament and really, like, I think, lay a marker down. They can't possibly take all five, can they?
Yeah, I don't know how many of them will be able to recover by the time the World Cup rolls on. I think Pinuta Fernando has a hamstring injury, so that might, be a cause for concern. I don't think they'll take all five when they've got the likes of Chamika Karunaratne also in the squad. But yeah, it's a great place to be, right? When you've got that much of depth and that much of variation. Because, Chamira bowls quick, but he's a different type of bowler to someone like Lahiru Kumar, who also bowls quick, but, is more in your face, is more the kind of enforcer. So that depth and that variety is massive for Sri Lanka going forward.
Yeah, it's as we said, I suppose the theme of this podcast is it's such a great time to be a Sri Lanka fan, and it hasn't been for a very long time. So let's just drink this all in, right? And there's loads of reasons to be positive if you're a fan of Sri Lanka cricket or just cricket in general, I suppose. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to Sri Lanka in 99.94. Please rate, review, and subscribe. You can download the 99.94 app for your phone. You can follow us personally on Twitter. I'm at Mark Machado. And Estelle, you are at Estelle _Vasu D1. Is that right?
Yeah. My name was too long to insert as a username. So that's the Vasudi one.
That's the blessing and curse of being Sri Lankan, right? We'll put links up for everything we do on this podcast and beyond on our own social media. You can also follow our network at 9994DM on social media. Follow for podcasts and commentary from the bat and ball world. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation on 99.94.